Mara Voss had learned early in life that the forest did not care who you were. It did not care if you were tired, or cold, or running late. It simply existed, wide and quiet and indifferent, and it was up to you to move through it carefully, or not at all. She had been moving through this particular stretch of forest since she was 8 years old, following her grandmother through the mist, with a small basket and instructions to watch where she stepped. Now she was 27, and she still watched where she stepped, and she still carried a basket, though it was larger now, and accompanied by a field medic kit strapped across her back. The morning was cold. October in the Carpathian Highlands had a way of arriving not gradually, but all at once, as if autumn had simply decided overnight to become something harder. Mara's breath came out in small white clouds as she moved between the trees, her eyes on the ground, looking for the pale, feathery leaves of the yarrow plant she had been tracking for the better part of 2 weeks. She was further into the forest than she usually went. She knew this. The wooden signs with their faded lettering had begun appearing 30 minutes back. Private property, no trespassing, and she had walked past them with the calm confidence of someone who had weighed the risk and decided the yarrow was worth it. It always was. The strain she was looking for had specific properties that the plants closer to the village lacked, and her grandmother's joints were getting worse, and the medical post needed the tincture she could make from it. She told herself these things as justification. Mostly, she just loved the deep forest, and would have come anyway. She almost missed him. He was at the bottom of a narrow ravine, barely visible between the roots and the low-ground fog. She saw his dark jacket first, then the stillness of him, and her stomach dropped in the way it always did when her brain registered a person who was not moving. She was down the slope before she had consciously decided to move, sliding the last few feet on wet leaves, and landing beside him on her knees. He was face down, large, very large, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of build that made it clear he was not a man who lived softly. His dark hair was matted with dried blood on one side. His skin, where she touched his neck to check his pulse, was dangerously cold. But there was a pulse, steady enough. She worked quickly, and without panic. This was what her training had given her, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act before the fear caught up. She checked his airway, assessed his breathing, ran her hands along his arms and legs looking for breaks. His left side told a different story, a deep laceration through his jacket, dried and dark at the edges, that had been bleeding for some time. His right shoulder sat at a wrong angle. She made a decision. "I'm going to roll you over," she said aloud, even though she was not sure he could hear her. She had learned that it was always better to speak to an unconscious person. "This is going to hurt. I'm sorry." It did hurt. The moment she shifted his shoulder, his eyes opened, dark, unfocused, and burning with something that was not quite pain and not quite anger, but somewhere between the two. He made a sound that was not a word. "Stay still," she said, firmly and without apology. "Your shoulder is dislocated. I need to set it. Breathe." He breathed. She worked. He did not make another sound, which told her either that he had a very high pain tolerance or that he was still not fully conscious. She suspected both were true. The laceration on his side was serious, but not immediately life-threatening, provided she could close it and keep it clean. She worked through her kit methodically, cleaning the wound, closing it with the butterfly strips she carried, covering it with a bandage that she pressed firmly enough to make him wince again. Then she looked up at the ravine walls and did a quiet calculation. There was a forester's shelter 40 minutes away if she moved steadily. It was basic. 4 walls, a small iron stove, a wooden shelf with some supplies left by whoever used it last. But it was dry and enclosed, and far better than an open ravine in October. The road was further. The village was 2 hours. She made her second decision of the morning. It took her nearly an hour to get him to the shelter, and it was the hardest physical thing she had ever done. He was semi-conscious for parts of it, which helped. He could bear some weight, could stumble forward when she directed him, could grip the arm she put around him. But there were stretches where he went heavy, and she simply had to hold on and keep moving, one step and then another, until the trees opened slightly and the dark shape of the shelter appeared ahead. She got him inside. She got the stove lit. She sat on the floor for 3 full minutes, doing nothing except breathing, before she got up and went back to work. His name, he told her on the first evening, was Darius. Just that. No last name offered, no explanation of who he was, or why he had been lying in a ravine with a knife wound. She did not push. In her experience, people told you what they needed to tell you when they were ready, and pushing only made them close up faster. He was a difficult patient, which she had expected the moment she saw the set of his jaw. He kept trying to sit up before he should. He asked where his jacket was. She had cut parts of it away, with a controlled calm that suggested he was more concerned about what had been in the pockets than about the jacket itself. He watched her with dark eyes that missed nothing. "The jacket is there," she said, pointing to the shelf where she had placed what remained of it. "Whatever was in it, I didn't touch." He looked at her for a moment. "I didn't say you did. You were thinking it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. "You're very direct." "You're very guarded," she replied. "We're both working with what we have." He was quiet after that, but the quality of the silence changed. It became less defensive and more thoughtful, which she took as progress. She talked to fill the silence, because silence in small enclosed spaces during long nights had always made her restless. She told him about the yarrow she had been tracking, and why it mattered. She told him about her grandmother's hands, and the way arthritis had slowly stolen the fine motor skill from fingers that used to braid her hair. She told him about Bucharest, the noise of it, the ambition of it, the way she had loved it completely, and still chosen to leave. He listened. That was the thing she noticed most. He did not listen the way most people did, with one part of their attention while the other part waited for their turn to speak. He listened the way someone listens when the information genuinely matters to them, as if he were filing every word somewhere careful and permanent. On the second night, when the fire was low and she was half asleep on the bench across from him, he spoke without prompting. "Someone wanted to make a point," he said, "in the forest. That's why I was there." She opened her eyes. "Did they make it?" "No." "Good," she said simply, and closed her eyes again. On the third morning, he was well enough to stand. She watched him cross the small room slowly but steadily, and something in her chest loosened with relief. The wound was clean, the shoulder was holding, the color had come back to his face, and with it, a quality that she could only describe as authority, the sense that this was a man who was very rarely not in control of a room, and who was only now remembering that. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression she could not entirely read. "You will be compensated," he said. "I didn't do it for compensation," she replied. He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why you will be." Then he walked into the trees, and she stood in the doorway of the shelter until he was out of sight, and then she went, and finally found her yarrow. 10 days later, 2 black vehicles arrived in Verleni and parked in front of the medical post. Mara was inside, reorganizing the supply cabinet for the 3rd time that month, because the shipments kept arriving incomplete, and reorganization gave her a sense of control over something. She heard the vehicles. She heard the low voices outside. She assumed, with a sinking feeling, that it was something to do with the trespassing. When the door opened and Darius walked in, she went very still. He was clean. He was composed. He wore dark clothing that was simple in design, but clearly expensive in the way that quiet things are expensive. Not announcing themselves, simply being. He moved through the doorway of the small medical post the way large men sometimes move through small spaces, with careful awareness of his own size. He looked exactly like himself, and also like someone entirely different. The name came to her, a half-second later, the way things do when the mind is catching up to what the eyes already know. Lucan, the family that owned the mountain, the name that appeared on the posted signs she had walked past, the name that appeared in conversations at the village edge, attached always to words like acquisition, and dispute, and displacement. Darius Lucan, 34 years old, sole head of the Lucan Group, following his father's death earlier that year, the man her neighbors referenced when they were angry about the land, the man nobody in the village had ever actually seen. She had spent 3 days keeping him alive in a forest shelter. "You could have told me," she said. It was the only thing she could find to say. "You wouldn't have treated me the same," he replied. She hated that he was right. She stood there and hated it thoroughly and completely, and then she let out a long breath and said, "What happened in that forest?" He told her. He told her about the ambush, men hired by members of his own extended family, cousins contesting the estate since his father's death. He told her about the forged message that had brought him into the forest alone, and about the fight, and about the long crawl toward the road that she had interrupted. He told her that his absence had been covered as a private retreat, and that the matter with his cousins had since been handled through legal means. He told her all of it in the same even, controlled tone he used for everything, and she listened the way he had listened to her, with all of her attention, filing every word. When he finished, she said, "You knew exactly who you were the whole time." "Yes." "And you let me talk about my grandmother, and my yarrow plants, and why I left the city." "Yes." "And you said nothing about yourself." He looked at her steadily. "I told you my name. You told me half your name." "It was the half that mattered," he said. Then, more quietly, "The other half changes how people look at me. I wanted to see how you looked at me without it." The village outside was silent, in the way villages go silent when something unusual is happening, and everyone has decided to watch from a safe distance. Mara was aware of this. She was also aware that she was not as angry as she probably should have been, and that this fact irritated her almost as much as everything else. "What do you want?" she asked. "To honor what I said." She shook her head. "I told you I didn't. You told me you didn't do it for compensation," he said. "I heard you. What I'm offering is not compensation." He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and placed a folded document on the counter between them. "The shelter where you brought me stands on a parcel of forest land, 11 acres. I've had it transferred to your name." She looked at the document. She did not pick it up. "I also arranged for a supply delivery to this post," he continued. "Equipment that has been requested for 4 years. It arrives on Thursday." She looked up at him. "You looked into the medical post's request history?" "I looked into a number of things," he said simply. She picked up the document then. She read it carefully, the way she did everything, thoroughly, without rushing, without letting the weight of the moment push her past the details. The transfer was real. The land was the land she knew, her shelter, her trees, the ground where the yarrow grew in the spring. She set it down. "I'm not going to pretend that I don't want this," she said. "The land, or the supplies. My grandmother lives 3 kilometers from that shelter, and the post has needed those supplies for years. I'm not going to perform indifference to make a point." "I wouldn't expect you to," he said. "But I want you to understand something," she continued. "Those 3 days, what you saw of me, how I talked to you, that was real. That wasn't a performance either. And if you're here because you want something from it, you should say so now, because I don't have patience for things that aren't honest." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm here," he said finally, "because I spent 3 days watching someone who operates without any interest in what other people think of them, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about how rare that is." It was the longest honest sentence he had offered her, and she could tell by the slight tension around his eyes that it had cost him something. She nodded slowly. "That's a better answer." "I know," he said. Outside, the October wind moved through the village square. Somewhere down the road, her grandmother's house sat with its crooked gate and its garden that needed cutting back before the first frost. "There's a stand of yarrow I didn't finish collecting," she said. "In the forest, I know the way. You don't." He looked at her. "You can come," she said, "if you want, but I walk ahead, because I know the path, and you don't speak until you have something real to say." He picked up his jacket from the counter. "Those are reasonable terms." She was already at the door.